Good morning, everyone. I'm Charlie Hartwell. I'm going to have the panel introduce themselves in a moment. We have one change in our panel. Kathleen from Nationwide was not able to make it, so Seth, who will introduce himself, is going to join us in her stead. We had a great discussion this morning, and I kind of felt as though our panel could be like 2 hours long and we could really cover some interesting ground. But all of you in the room, we are sort of here co-creating what might be described as a movement, what might be described as an industry, an evolution, a revolution. The words necessarily don't matter. But as we're doing that, going from sort of ideas to science proving ideas, to entrepreneurs taking those ideas and bringing them out into the world, to then integrating them into systems, whether that be into the military or into insurance companies, into the healthcare system, hospitals, companies, into consumers. We have just a great group of people here to kind of talk about the process of going from science to scalability. I'm going to have them each introduce themselves, but first, my name is Charlie Hartwell. I'm from Minneapolis. I am the operating partner for an investment group called the Bridge Builders Collaborative. We have 5 partners in our collaborative, and we're passionate about finding scalable ways to help people connect more deeply to themselves so they can live happier, healthier lives. We don't define what that is for people. We try to find great entrepreneurs that have good science behind their ideas and support them to bring their ideas out into the world, to create an impact, to have some fun doing it along the way, and to create sustainable growth businesses. I've been doing this for 6 years. When we started, my partners asked the question, is there anything to invest in the space? And it took a little while to find some things, and now there are hundreds of enterprises with really good entrepreneurs that have started companies in this space. And I'm from Minneapolis, and I'm just going to turn it over to John to provide an introduction.
Thank you, Charlie. I'm Dr. John Sullivan. I'm a clinical sports psychologist and sports scientist. I've worked 20 years in elite and high-performance sport with appointments in the NFL, the English Premier League, and the NCAA. Also a visiting scholar and a visiting researcher at the Queensland University of Technology and Queensland Academy of Sport. I also am a technology advisor to a number of companies. So this space is very near and dear to me in the sense of how we can help people be healthy, because I work in sports medicine and in sports science, and also achieve human performance, high performance.
My name is Seth Feuerstein. I'm a criminal forensic, in perfect sense it makes that I'm a criminal forensic psychiatrist who became sort of an investor and an accidental software salesman, and then my company was acquired by Magellan. I became an accidental health insurance executive. And so I'm really here, I guess, in that capacity. We built sort of a digital health delivery system for sort of first generation cognitive behavioral therapy. We scaled that to about 30 million lives at this point in the US. But I still do some teaching, and I have an NIH grant to train NIH grantees on how to scale their technologies and translate them. And I do want to add, since I'm a seat filler and I can get away with it since I'm not officially here, that it's an honor to be here. There are people like Pete Corelli, who I consider national heroes, and people like Kathleen Salisbury, who run the National Suicide Lifeline, and so it's an honor to be here, and thanks for having me.
Good morning. My name is Ofer Leidner, and I'm a co-founder and president of a New York-based company called Happify and Happify Health. I've been a serial entrepreneur, they call them, for the past 15 years, and in the past 5 years, I'm on a journey with Happify, which is a emotional health platform that provides evidence-based interventions with a goal to break a lot of the challenges in scale. We're going to talk about, delighted to be here, passionate about the topic.
Great. So I want to start with the science. Dr. Sullivan, I just want to start with a question. You wrote the book, The Brain Always Wins, and I'm wondering if you can describe what you mean by that, and also, given your expertise in sports and the military, how are those systems beginning to bring these solutions into their...
Yeah, the brain always wins. That even term or saying came out of a conversation, as all good ideas do. They come out of conversations, and it was with my co-author, Chris Parker, professor at Nottingham Trent University. And it was really about the concept that there was this, we felt like there's two gaps. There's gaps in knowledge about the brain, and there's gaps in scientists telling proper narratives about science, making it approachable, making it tangible, making it engaging. But it also goes to the heart of the science that basically we don't learn very much about the brain. And that it is working is the most complex survival system in the known universe. So it's always working towards our survival. But we don't learn how to keep it healthy. And it works in the area of high performance as well. When people engage with consciousness or saying you just have to think more positively, consciousness is 350 milliseconds behind what the brain has already figured out. And so what you're training people to do is create a healthy situation, a healthy process to be healthy. So when you train them to be able to read and react, see and do, they're better able to. And we all are high performers, no matter what we do. And so the heart of it was really describing health is the foundation of performance. So going how it affects the sport and high performance. The ethos in the United States is very Hollywood-esque, that performance is some separate bucket. And health doesn't touch it. When health is the foundation of all high performance, no matter what everyone does here, or when I'm working with high performers in sport, the elite military, and law enforcement. And so we forget that. And we also don't prioritize the brain in how we learn, how we train, how we rest and recovery. And that's not just sport. We don't prioritize it in education. We don't prioritize it in medicine in the ways that it should be. And we haven't for decades. So the heart of the book was refocusing and allowing people to see the message that we have access to our brain and we have access to keep it healthy, which sets everything else in motion because everything else serves the brain. We don't eat for any other reason but brain health. We don't sleep for any other reason but brain health. Exercise is medicine for the brain. And so it was setting up that narrative because there's a gap there.
And are people more aware of it over the last few years from your...
From my perspective, I think that the leaders in it are the military. I find it very interesting when life and death, it makes us much more specific. We're in sport, we're still eyeballing things. Now, are there areas or enclaves where it becomes more of a priority? And not just concussions, but more of a priority through the whole process. Yes, it is moving in that direction. From my standpoint, is it moving fast enough? No. Because we have to overcome that ethos of the false narratives of toughness and grit or mindset. These are actually very weak sciences, and some of them have literally no science. So we have to overcome those traditional cultural sayings.
Gotcha. So I'm going to switch to Ofer, who is one of the entrepreneurs in the space. And Ofer, can you just describe a little bit the experience and the idea of coming up with Happify, and what's happened to the idea over the last several years, and how is it sort of fitting in to the system of what people are interested in accessing in the world today?
So maybe just a brief background of how I came to be passionate about this, and because I have a slightly non-traditional background. So prior to starting to work on Happify, I spent about a decade building a fairly large casual gaming company. For those of you who may or may not be familiar with what casual games are, these are the small, highly addictive experiences that I bet some of you have on your phones. If you don't have on your phones, your kids have on the phones. And that's what we have done for a decade before this project, so very different environment. But in that world, and we've built a fairly large network, over 60 million players that played on our platform, build great games, and people spend a lot of time with them. And around 2010, we did this presentation about the performance of the overall business, and we calculated that we had 21 billion hours a year that people spend playing these games. And that number struck me as a tremendously waste of time. As much as I was a founder and growing a great business, and then the insight that we had was, can we take some of these mechanics, some of this engagement, to actually help people cultivate healthier behaviors? And then we kind of said, if we can apply these mechanics and engagement loops that are no different than any behavior form loops, there's something to do there. So got interested in this idea and was very interested in evidence-based science, and our approach was any evidence science around emotional health. I hold a strong belief that how people feel matters to how they perform, to how they act, how healthy they are, and went and kind of partnered with scientists. We're not a scientist, but we bring tremendous amount of experience on how to translate evidence-based interventions into the practical applications. Built the service and launched it first as a consumer play. In our world, this is how you make sure that people really use these applications. The whole idea was to bring well-studied research, peer-reviewed interventions into environment that would allow more people to engage. We do know that the science is there and evolving. The question is, how do we put it in front of as many people as possible? So we went and optimized the experience and tried to solve for access, for convenience, for stigma. We chose a very controversial name on purpose, Happify. We're not really doing happiness, although people do report that they feel happier. And then went out and optimized the service for consumers. We had 3.5 million people using the service on a direct-to-consumer model. And then we started getting calls from a lot of healthcare providers, insurers, large employers that said to us, hey, what you guys are doing, this translation of interventions into real-world things that people can do and practice on their own is something I would like to use. So about 2.5 years ago, we enterprised our business. We work today with large national health insurers, large employers, delivery systems. And really the idea is to make this available to more people. We address a continuum from preventative resilience, well-being applications, mood disorders. We have really good outcomes on depression and anxiety, and we're doing a lot of work in the chronic condition space. I guess the biggest change that we have seen in this journey, which given that it involves really unique multidisciplinary approach, really good science with technology and engagement design, we've seen there's no shortcuts. So we've seen the slow but steady adoption of these technologies, the awareness, and we're very excited about the growth in this space. There's a lot of people that need these interventions that you guys are all researching, studying, and bringing to market. So that's I guess what we're seeing.
Great. So Seth, you come from both the entrepreneurial world and now you're at Magellan. Can you talk a little bit about how systems, insurance or corporate clients of Magellan's, how they're thinking of brain fitness and how their perceptions are changing about brain fitness, or is it brain fitness that they even care about, or is it well-being? What do you see happening?
Yeah, I'm sure you all know in the health insurance industry, it's all about patient care first. It's the only thing that so I don't need to address that. And I just want to say one thing, like I'm envisioning what Ofer was saying about casual gaming. I just have to say this, so I was envisioning Candy Crush. And I sort of, the natural evolution, I would say, in the healthcare industry would be, okay, let's take Candy Crush and let's just make that omega-3 fatty acid crush. Because like, okay, that works, let's take like something and then, but I think, what he did is a good case example where we were talking earlier. So a few things that I think people don't do, that the industry actually is really interested in, and you should know, like, I saw my name up with Magellan Health. It makes me uncomfortable. I'd say I'm more of an entrepreneur than a health insurance person, but I live on the inside. So the data is the difference. That was the slogan at our company. I think in everything you do, the data, everything should be about the data, because all of these projects are sort of perpetually iterative. And I think the industry kind of finally understands that. It used to sort of be, let's take this thing, let's do a 6-month pilot, let's measure it at the end. I think everyone has finally moved beyond that. So that's sort of an important stage gate to think about. I think for those of you that have a smart device, you might have to look this up, but I'm going to give an example of what I think the most important thing is in terms of what the payers want to see, but they don't know what it is, so you kind of have to bring it to them. There's a consulting firm called Oliver Wyman, and if you do a search on your device, if you search Oliver Wyman healthcare hassle map, you'll get this picture. And imagine the healthcare ecosystem today imagine this picture. There's payers or people at risk. It could be the employer or the payer. There's the provider, and there's the patient, right? You can pick any stakeholders, and there's all these hassle lines, like between everybody in the system. And so we all know that. We've all experienced it, usually with more than one hat. And for those of you taking chemistry, if you envision that hassle map with all these lines, the challenge, I think, in sort of convincing a payer or an employer or a government agency to sort of do something with you and then scale it is, which of those hassle lines, so they're like chemical bonds, those hassle lines, and if you break them and you remove that hassle, in my mind, I have kind of a crazy mind, but my view is like you're releasing energy. And then the trick is, can you actually solve that hassle for somebody in the system? And then can you capture that energy that's released in that chemical bond? And if you try to do too many things at once in the system, it's not measurable and you can't succeed. And can you pick the right hassle lines where someone actually cares about the value? So there are a lot of hassles in the system that we all know need to be eliminated, but you can't identify where that, quote, economic burden falls or who really cares. So the primary care provider might know, but the payer doesn't care, and they're the one paying for it. Or the payer may care, but the primary care provider doesn't. And so how do you identify the right bonds to break, right? And so in your case, you've sort of identified these particular bonds, and you're capturing the energy and measuring it. And I think that's really what payers and employers, which are really in the same bucket, want to see. But unfortunately, they don't know which lines are the ones. You kind of have to tell them. And so the people it's just the reality, because they don't know what's going on out there. And so it's, when you engage in a conversation, it's admitting that up front, like, well, I need to understand more about, like, what are the hassles you're trying to solve? What are the pain points? What can you measure? There are a lot of misunderstandings about, like, what do the different payers even have data on, right? And that they can measure, or what are you measuring with your technology? And then can you quantify in some sort of term of art that they use and begin to provide information and utility to them in a digestible format? And this is probably your experience, since it takes 90 days or so just to get the first draft of a document, that gives you a lot of time for back and forth. And I think what happens is people with technologies often sort of say, let's do a contract, let's pay for the service, let's get it up and running. But they don't do that ongoing dialogue, and they're often afraid to say, I don't know. And actually that's in some ways the most important thing. It's like, look, we know we built a great engaging technology. We know we can empower people to better understand, but help us understand from you, like, what do you know and what problems can I help you solve with this? I think most people with technologies are afraid to say that, and that's almost the most important thing to say in the discussions. If that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it's great. So we're talking about systems, and I want to get back to consumers or the end users, because Ofer, you were describing that you started as a company that really was a consumer engagement model, and then you had interest from organizations. And John, you deal with people who are at the front lines, with athletes in the military. What is it that it seems to me that people don't want the organizations to tell them to do this, to do this, to do this, that successful models are going to be ones that are driven by consumer interest. And I'm just wondering, from all of your perspectives, how do you see the consumer involved in all of what we're talking about here?
I think it's a powerful space, because if you break it out, like you just said, there's an additional group there, which is fitness. Exercise is different than sport. Sport is different than military and law enforcement and firefighters. So you actually have quite large segments. Exercise is neuroprotective. Sport is not. But that data is critically important across those platforms to create health, to certainly allow human performance to happen. But you don't know what you don't know, and data should drive that. But the consumer spaces are getting quite confused. It's because the marketing has been so slick, it looks as if it is science, but it's not. And so what it's creating is harm or underutilization of a technology because in 3 months, it's put away in a drawer. And that's critical in my world. And so what I think one of the consumer spaces is missing is when I think about development of any individual, if you think about the number of doctors you have or the number of caretakers you have, for most people, it's a 4-to-1 ratio. For long-term athlete development and high performance, it's an 8-to-12. There's 8-to-12 people who work in service of developing one elite athlete. It's 12-to-14 in the elite military. So I'm an end user. So if that person buys a piece of technology, and I look at the science, and it shows no safety validity, has no proof of validity through their own science, and then peer review, I will not allow them to use it. Because their health and welfare is on me. So I'm a gatekeeper. And so where I think the industry is missing is establishing well-defined metrics of their science. Because how can we, in an ethical mind, feel comfortable about someone buying something that's going to create harm or create addiction? Yeah, so what I think they're missing is there's more than one end user. And that's a real important piece to be remembered in this space.
Yeah, from our experience, and again, we tested it with millions of people before we felt comfortable, having any opinion about it. When we started the business, we thought that helping people live happier life is what people would actually get attracted to, and we used interventions from positive psychology, mindfulness, some CBT, and the approach was to provide different programs and different pathways, if you will, that allow people to basically come and self-select what, with a lot of technology and intelligent, self-select what they actually would see most benefit from. What we did find out that while there's a good chunk of people that are really looking at well-being as an opportunity to improve performance and peak performance, thrive, there's tremendous amount of people that are looking for help that are kind of on the continuum of dealing with elevated levels of stress, anxiety, and depression. We all know the numbers. 1 in 5 Americans is dealing with clinically diagnosed depression. And yet, when you look at the numbers of people that step forward and say, I need help, you'll get this 3% utilization of EAP programs. So the question is, how do we bypass the stigma and allow people to come forward and get interact with the tools without stigmatize them, without having them to self-stigmatize. And that's a lot of what we spend time on, is essentially creating this inviting, inclusive environment that allows people to come and find the right solution that helps them. And that is defined by a program in our world, that is defined by certain types of interventions. Meditation is an amazing intervention. I'm meditating every day. There's a great amount of people that would never be able to meditate. We need to provide them some types of solutions. There are people who would like to, really would like the services, but they don't have the access. They can't afford. Convenience is a big challenge. So the whole idea about scaling is eliminating all of those and allowing people to consume what they need. We found on our platform, we didn't know that our platform has very good outcomes with depression and anxiety until we started measuring and kind of put people in front of PHQ-9 and other measurements that we're doing on the platform, and realized that this provides solution for depression and anxiety. Do these people identify themselves as depressed? Do they go and get diagnosed? No, but we get 25 to 30% of the people that would activate to basically measure clinically depressed or with risk for clinical depression. So to me, it's about advancing the tools, allowing people to get access to them, easy access, affordable access. And I very well see the need, as you described, for kind of emphasizing the science, because I think there's a lot of noise in the market, and the companies that are not spending time to get the science right may get a short-term hype, but long-term, there's no shortcuts. You've got to get the science right, and it's what would differentiate between good companies and companies that will disappear.
I just want to make sure I remember the question. So it was, where does the consumer come in? I mean, so I live in New Haven, Connecticut, sort of like the dividing line between Boston and New York, right? So, I think, I will say, I hope we succeed because helping people identify sort of what's going on, they may remember if they deflated footballs or other things would solve a lot of controversy where I live. But I think, which they obviously don't recall, but I think, the consumer's tricky because I think different people with what I'll call capital to spend in the industry have different uses, and I use that word intentionally, for the consumer, right? So a lot of the players who are acquiring technologies to use for the consumers that they're responsible for, sometimes they're just trying to sell more insurance product, right? Or they may want their employees to feel like they're better off, even if they're not actually better off, right? So there are many different metrics that they're ultimately focused on. And so figuring out like which type of consumer and actually what you want from that consumer is really important. So for instance, there's a lot of things that make people feel really good that actually ultimately cost more for healthcare and do them damage, and the consumer's unaware of that. And so they may rate really positively on certain scales, but ultimately are doing worse. And so just want to make sure we're careful about that. And I think that in my mind, I think probably you're thinking about consumer-driven sort of health decision-making and things like that. I think sort of the other weird curveball is that, basically in terms of moving the needle, and I was talking to some people about this last night, it's like stop smoking, lose weight, move more. Everything else is basically noise, right? In terms of overall healthcare cost and spending, et cetera. And so, harnessing tools to move those needles is really, really important. I think when you're talking about employers, the consumer data that they're interested in is, are they showing up for work? And are they productive when they're at work? A lot of that has to do with the fact that they have no data coming from anywhere else. If they had actual healthcare data flowing through their ecosystem, then they might care about other things. So the only real consumer, they want to believe that when people rate happier on a PHQ-9 or when the PHQ-9 scores are lower, that they're doing better, but they need to correlate that to HR data, ultimately. I think then there are other sort of important pieces in terms of scaling your technology around things that most of you have probably never heard of. Like most health insurers are rated around how many people have heard of HEDIS measures? Right, so probably about a third of you, right? And so like there can be these random so these are measures like the NCAA and other organizations and government agencies, they put these measures in place. And honestly, they're mostly arbitrary third-party metrics, like 7-day follow-up post-hospitalization. Like, well, that's not really a measure of anything, except did they see somebody within 7 days of discharge, right? But that was chosen because there was no data on anything. And so it was like, well, there are some studies that show if you're followed up with, you do better. And so let's start measuring that. And, we're in an era now where we can do a lot better with what we're measuring, but the healthcare system is stuck with these rules that took decades to put in place and will take decades to remove. And so there's this weird parallel track around the consumer. Like the kind of data that you're collecting technologically, that we're collecting at Magellan with some of our tools that other companies are collecting, that you're getting through EEG or whatever, are way better in terms of how people are doing. Because if you don't see someone for 7 days and you see them on day 8, but all the information we have about you is that you're pretty much rocking it, like you're doing awesome, you're back at work, but you couldn't get to the doctor because you're working, right? We actually have that data now, but for whatever reason, that consumer data is not in the system. And so figuring out how to build that into the way you think about things is really, really important, and trying to have what seems like random context built into when you're trying to build these things out and scale them. Another example I give has to do with, this is a brain conference, so outpatient mental health. People, when they're looking at a technology, the first question almost any employer or payer will ask is, so tell me how long people are engaged with the program. I'm sure you experience, like, how many weeks do they use it? How many months? Do they complete it, right? That's sort of like standard medical. Well, you know, how many of you remember what the mode is in statistics? Mean, median, and mode, right? Okay, so at least some of you, right? So, you know, the mode, like when you refer people for outpatient mental health care, how many of you know what the mode number of visits is? Yeah, David, of course you know, right? You know, it's less than 2. Like if you hit 1.5, like that's awesome, right? Like most people do not make it, well, yeah, I mean, and then the averages are skewed, by the way, by people who go into long-term therapy and go more, but so like most people are not hitting 2 sessions. So like if you're hitting 3 sessions with some sort of new intervention, that's actually awesome. But if you don't know that mode number for traditional care and you go into those meetings, you're not going to convince them to scale what you're doing, because honestly, the person on the other side of the table, they don't know what the mode is either. You kind of have to tell them. And so it's really, really important, and to me that's consumer data, actually. The consumer doesn't know it, most doctors don't know it, most health plan executives don't know it, but being equipped with that data, so when they say, well, how many people finish all 8 weeks of whatever, you say, well, actually most people do about 3 or 4 weeks, but they're X% better, and being comfortable saying back to them, how many people in your system today go to more than 2 visits? Now, they're not going to know the answer, and so saying it in a way where you don't offend them for their lack of data, and saying, well, we do better than the mode in your population, and we actually measure how they're doing, will convince them that you're equipped with the sort of multivariate consumer data that will show them you're having an impact on the population. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. So I want to insert one other thing, and I want to leave time for questions. So, you know, from science to scalability also takes capital. So I want to insert myself as, you know, somebody that looks at the industry, you know, on behalf of my partners, and helps to provide capital to fuel these ideas to get into, you know, to get into these type of distribution systems. And, you know, as I look at the consumer, that, you know, Ofer, and we're investors in Happify, so when we looked at, you know, investing in Happify, it really was this great consumer model. And what I'm seeing happen in the space is that people who have great engagement models, they might start as a consumer-driven product, and like in Ofer's case, organizations start saying, and more so are starting to see their employees a little bit differently, and they're starting to see them more as somebody was describing it last night, as, you know, it's not about wellness, it's about the well-being of our employees. And so they're actually looking around for great scientifically validated concepts, but that's not enough anymore. They want the concepts that they bring to their population to be something that the population enjoys, and it has diversity to reach people in different ways and different access points. So I just want to say, as someone who is providing capital, I look at and say, are the businesses that we invest in, do they have great ideas? Do they have good science behind them? But then is the leadership, the people that fuel the ideas, do they have the capability to shift their business model, their business plan to adapt to what I think is an ever-changing market? And I guess the last question, and we can address it maybe quickly so we can get to questions, is, so here we are, a lot has happened in this space over the last 5, 6, 10 years. Where do you see things in 3 to 5 years?
You know, I go back to some of the things the panelists were saying, is I think the gap is there's a huge opportunity, huge potential. We understand the brain, even though the brain physiology and being interested in it has been around since the 1800s. Most of the technology we use has been around since the 1970s. And so it's certainly there and allows us to see inside. But the potential's high, but the gap is exactly what these gentlemen have been saying, is the knowledge. Key stakeholders, the worst thing is that they don't know, but it's worse than that. It's the illusion of knowing. The illusion of knowledge, that they understand the space, understand the brain, and understand the outcomes that can happen to improve employee health, improve human performance, because we're all performers. And so we have to start telling stories of well-packaged truth. And the companies that are certainly creating noise in the marketplace are not telling well-packaged truth. We're not telling narratives that are engaging, that are approachable, that can allow stakeholders to monetize this, engage with it, or see the higher ethics of doing it. And I think the potential's high, but we have to bridge that gap. If we don't, the noise will overcome those who have taken the long yards of doing the science to bring us something that allows us to engage.
Yeah, in my mind, so we're going to see several things. I think we're going to see a lot of consolidation among technology companies, especially when it relates to the brain, as people try to piece together more, as a few things happen. Valuations have gotten pretty high, and as there's potentially no more capital to get above that, people will consolidate. That's one thing we're going to see, to build sort of broader-based solutions to more comprehensively provide data back and tackle problems. I think in my mind, I was talking to, I should have mentioned at the beginning, like, this is a great meeting. I was talking to Tom Insel and Bruce Wex, like amazing neuroscientists here, about this last night. I said this to them, like, this is sort of, in my mind, a golden era for what we do as a group here, right? Where, I don't mean to dehumanize us, but basically the brain is a data acquisition, processing, and distribution center. And when we think about what happened in cancer over sort of the previous 30 years, and especially the last 10 years with precision medicine, with genetic and proteomic data informing sort of treatment availability, treatment creation, disease tracking, and honestly, now cures for subtypes of cancers that people thought were like untreatable. People are actually like totally cured. It's kind of mind-boggling. Technology, EEG, software, hardware, combinations, other TMS, is going to allow us to sort of diagnose, track, and treat the brain in ways that like were never even imaginable. And I think the next 3 to 5 years are really going to start to open the door to that. And it'll create treatments for things for which there's no available treatment today. There'll be combinations of things, including drugs, that were sort of not believed to be the case. And then there'll be things for which, drug and other traditional things are superior, and those will sort of blend together for different diseases across the spectrum. That we'll see in the next 3 to 5 years.
And let's just get, I want to have Ofer, because I want to get to questions.
Yep.
I just want to give Ofer a chance to.
Yeah, so I think that in the next 3 to 5 years, we're likely going to see a continued adoption by consumers, which is where we want it to be. Combination of more solid science and evidence coming out and becoming more available to consumers. And again, if you take the brain fitness market and trying to think of markets like yoga and other markets that have started with some evidence and became more so. So I think that with some consumer demand and that would come in, the opportunity to take these kind of incredible interventions in science and tools that we're all building would become more available. I do believe that there's certain areas that are must solve from an industry point of view. We have 2 epidemics that I'm really passionate about seeing solutions. ADHD is one, obviously, and the second one is on the entail, which is dementia. These are the 2 big, I think, buckets that needs to be solved on brain health. And then on the technology side, I think that we're going to see concept evolving around AI, which, right now everybody think AI, it's like far in the future, but we're actually coming with a product in October, and it's we've been training algorithms for 2 years, so I think it's pretty cool. And also VR, I think that there's a lot of opportunities with VR, essentially simulating certain environments for the brain and train people within these environments.
Thank you. And I want to now turn it over to you if there are questions. How much time do we have? About 6 minutes. Okay, a couple questions. Go ahead.
So I'm very curious about, you talked about the illusion of knowledge. I'm curious about your thoughts on the illusion that what we eat doesn't have the power to alter our brain, and then even to expand upon that you have to have very aggressive pharmaceutical agents to change the brain. And that's just another modality because the brain is made of what we eat and it cleans out based upon what we drink. So I'm curious what your guys' thoughts on, because we do that 3 times, hopefully, at least a day. And I'm wondering how we spread that
that research is already being done, and some of it's been done in the military, looking at that food is. Okay.
Oh. So the question really is,
Hello! Since I have the mic, I'm going to tell you to come eat the grilled cheese and bacon later today because I have to stay for now. No, I just wanted to ask, I mean, we eat at least 3 times a day, hopefully, or more, depending on your grazing patterns. And the brain is made of fat, and what we drink flushes the brain out. So
Yes.
I'm wondering,
Yes.
how do we scalability-wise get people to realize that you have at least 3 times a day or to either gaining on weight or to reverse the brain?
Yeah, there's a number of levels to that question. First of all, there's research to show that most medical textbooks and nutritional textbooks in graduate school have to be rewritten because the gut-brain axis, it's missing that knowledge, it's missing that import, which is so important. And so much of what's actually being talked about in nutrition, think about it, we don't relate it to most of what we eat turns into precursors for neurotransmitters to fuel the brain. We don't think about hydration as about flushing the brain. So it starts one with that whole education process. The research side, there's already research being done on the very fact of, and you were touching on it a little bit, we're using food as interventions, increasing the higher level of certain bacteria in our gut, lowering certain medications, maybe lowering to the point of those medications coming off. Whether we talk about antidepressants, because serotonin, we don't make it internally. It's a precursor from tryptophan. So if we don't take that in nutritionally and then we don't protect the gut biota, we're not able to see, can we lower medication? Can we remove it? So that research is moving. It's exciting stuff because of where it intervenes is with depression, with anxiety. What we don't understand is gut-brain axis. The nodes that connect the vagus nerve here are so powerful, both sides of the stomach. And so what we also have to get to a point is understanding the signals of depression and anxiety are just that. They're sometimes signals to become more resilient. Mental health has not served us well. That's not a good term. It doesn't even accurate scientifically. It's brain health. So we think we are moving in that direction. Yeah, and I think it's going to be exciting times as more and more of that research comes out.
I'll just add one little layer to that, which is I think the answer and the question are a step ahead, right? Most people don't know what they're eating. Most people have no
processed
data.
foods.
And I think, right, so this is an important example of like, well, you can't really tell them what to change to if they don't know what they're doing now. And I think if you ask people what they ate yesterday, they have no idea. Even if they kept track, they're leaving stuff out or they're misrepresenting it. And yet, think about this, right? Pretty soon, I suspect for most of the people in this room, Amazon will have more data on what you are eating than you do.
Oh, yeah.
And so, but that's really exciting unless you're scared of them, because it means they can intervene with you and with your healthcare teams to sort of say, you know, you're ordering this crap, and unless it's for someone other than you, stop it, right? Or, you know, they can, so the data is really important, but you need to be able to apply it in a realistic way, and the reality is most people have no idea what they're consuming.
And I would go to your point and take it that much farther. So to your question is that often when we go into interventions about nutrition, we are not doing bloods or fecal matter examination. So we're not accurately prescribing nutrition that's going to change brain health. You need data. Data drives, you know, what gets measured gets managed, and we're not measuring that deep.
okay, one more question.
I have a question regarding, you talk about your stakeholders. Are any of you including the public health system when you talk about stakeholders and taking things to scale?
Yeah,
Because they, especially in rural areas.
I get it. So since we're short on time, I'll tell yes. So actually, we didn't directly address it. So I'll give you an example. So at least in my work, I don't think you've done Medicaid work. Have you done? So like we did, so that's super important. You know, the government payment system is different but related. Certainly there are things like Medicare Advantage, but we did so in partnership before we were acquired by Magellan. So actually that's one of the great things. It probably would have been sort of, had I continued for 30 minutes on my 3 to 5 year plan. You know, we did a rollout, so after Superstorm Sandy, we did a full technology-based rollout for the entire region, providing virtual mental health care to thousands of people, collecting lots of population health data. We can do that now. When there's, you know, an issue for large communities, and we've done it in Philadelphia in partnership with the Mental Health Association of New York City, like live plus technology. So you can, from a public health perspective, this is also a golden era where we can tackle things in entirely new ways. So absolutely.
Think upstream to prevention.
Yeah, I mean, I think smoking is the sort of most important one to start with in terms of public health. But yeah, absolutely.
Great. I wish we had more time, but we are done. Thank you for your questions. We probably can stick around for a couple of minutes if you have other questions. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to Linda and her team.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you.